Welcome to Rep Matters, where we bring a diverse perspective to tech and venture capital. We sat down with some of Canada's most interesting entrepreneurs and investors in order to understand their journeys, the impacts they hope to have moving forward, and how to improve equity and inclusion for the Black community in tech and VC. As well as being leaders in their respective fields, these entrepreneurs and investors all have something else in common. They're Black. Their lived experience as Black Canadians has helped shape their path to success, and we made sure to dive into what it means to thrive in such a homogeneous ecosystem. I hope you enjoy. Today on Rep Matters, we have the mighty Pelra Azondekon. Pelra is a young leader in the VC ecosystem here in Quebec and an ambassador for diversity and inclusion who has close to 15 years experience in accounting, corporate finance, mergers and acquisitions, and tech investments. Her passion for entrepreneurship led her to Investissement Québec, where she served at 3 years as a director of venture capital and recently led Nesto's $11.5 million Series A round. Pelra is the new director of corporate venture capital and entrepreneurial activities at Quebecor, where she continues to have a meaningful impact on the tech ecosystem in Quebec and beyond. We are very lucky to have her here on the show today. Pelra, thank you for being here. Welcome to Rep Matters.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So just to start off, since you're our first VC on the show, I just wanted to ask you, what is VC?
How much time do we have? I would say that, first off, I would define venture capital or VC as, a vehicle for innovation to serve as a catalyst for economic growth. So a VC investor will scout for the most innovative projects, the most promising startups, and bet on them. Essentially, they'll provide capital, mentorship, support in exchange for ownership and shares in that company. And all of this, to create value, to create growth for the company and increase the value of the company, to generate a financial return and outcome for the VC. Typically, an early stage VC will want to invest in startups in which it can expect to get an 8 to 10 times return on its initial investment. The way that this financial return will materialize is once the startup is sold to another stakeholder, another corporation, or goes through an IPO.
Mm-hmm. And then they get the return based on the equity that they have in the company.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So how is a typical VC firm structured?
So there are various ways of, conducting a VC activity, but the most common form that is seen is a private VC firm that will be structured legally as a limited partnership. So you'll have at the center of this the VC firm or the VC team that essentially manages the investment process, and that's defined and typically referred to as general partners, GPs. So they will leverage funds from institutional investors that are defined as limited partners, LPs, that entrust them with their capital to manage. And we often say that out of 10 companies that our VC will bet on, you have maybe one that will be
You're hoping
a home
for
run.
one. Yeah.
You're hoping for one that will be a unicorn. You have maybe 2 or 3 that may generate interesting returns, and that is supposed to be sufficient to make up for the fact that, unfortunately, maybe 75% of the portfolio won't be,
Will
great
disappear.
success.
Yeah. So many of the VCs that I speak to have really interesting journeys and unique pathways into VC, and yours is no different. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into VC?
So I graduated from HEC Montréal, with a major in accounting, and I obtained my CPA CA title. It's now CPA Auditor CA.
Okay.
And I started my career at EY, where I spent about 9 years. The first couple of years in external audit to obtain that chartered accountant license, and the last years I was in M&A, so in mergers and acquisitions, specializing in transaction due diligence. So I had the opportunity to work on close to 40 transactions in various industries, buy side.
How much time those 40?
3 years.
Fuck, that's
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
I was gonna say it's like 40 over 40 years is long,
Yeah,
but
no,
40 over
exactly.
3 years
The
is
last couple of years,
yeah.
3 years, very active years on the M&A in the M&A space. And we were working on deals in Canada, but also in the U.S., in Europe, in various industries, as I mentioned. So that was very interesting. But while I was at EY, one thing that's important to mention is that I actually left the firm for a couple of months. And that led me to join Enerchem in corporate finance. So Enerchem is the clean tech that's based here in Quebec, a clean tech, so a startup. So those were my first experiences with VC investors. So while I was there, we raised about $150 million.
Wow.
And, working with, as we were getting through due diligence, because we were raising, I was just fascinated by what funds like Cycle Capital, Row Ventures were doing. And I remember thinking, how come I haven't been made aware of this career path earlier? And I think it's unfortunate that, young graduates and students are not necessarily made aware of what PE and VC firms do exactly.
Yeah.
And, the same thing for, the skill set that it requires to aspire to
It's all very hush-hush.
to careers like that.
It's like, oh, everyone
Exactly.
talks about VC, but doesn't really talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing for private equity,
Same
like
thing
it's
for
not
private
really a
equity.
career path that they present to you, even if you graduate from a business school. So that was one of the main reasons why I left Enerchem. I had a clearer vision of where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
And I thought that, going back to my Big Four journey, going back to M&A was a great way to, develop and gain the skill set that could get me into investment. And that allowed me to seize the opportunity at IQ when it presented itself. And I've joined this great VC ecosystem over 3 years ago now.
So I want to pivot towards the Black experience in tech and VC here in Canada, and start off by asking you what your ethnic background is and whether you identify mainly with that, or your skin color, or your nationality.
That's a good question. So first off, I'm originally from Benin in West Africa, where I was born. And I immigrated here with my parents when I was very young. So I was raised in Quebec. But in terms of my identity, I think my identity is a mix of a lot of different things, and I think that's what's particular about me. But if you ask me, I think that I identify as a Black, Benino, Quebecor, Canadian. And yeah, you're biracial. I would say that I'm bicultural.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Well put, well put.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I am biracial. My dad's
Yeah.
from Haiti, my mom's from the US, so I'm like tricultural. And it's always been, I've definitely always stood out in my mind in that sense, right? Because I visibly stand out from the Black community and the white community per se.
Yeah.
And I struggled with my identity growing up, everyone does. And that was just kind of, the added layer to mine. Did you ever have any of those struggles, I guess, culturally?
Yes, definitely. So I grew up not in Montreal. I grew up in Gatineau. In suburban Gatineau
There you go.
in the 90s. So at a time where there wasn't that much Black immigration. So I definitely really stood out. And I guess that if I didn't know that I was Black, I was reminded on a daily, either through being picked on at school. Which is normal for children. Yes, I know. But even going through, I guess, episodes of what we call now microaggressions from adults that were supposed to be figures of authority or even role models to me, And I think I was very lucky to have very tenacious and persevering parents that essentially ingrained at a very young age, ingrained in me the fact that the concept that I could do anything, so anything was possible, but that came with a price. That I had to double up on efforts and deliver twice the result as my non-black, as compared to my non-black peers,
Yeah.
but it was very hard, I think, at that time to find role models, with in that quest for excellence, let's say, role models other than my parents to really identify to.
Because you look up to your parents, of course, everyone
Yeah.
does, but it's also kind of
Yeah.
like once you get to a certain age, you want to differentiate yourself. You want to have other role models.
Exactly.
I totally hear that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that another thing is that, I have an 8-year-old boy. So looking at my son and also my nieces and nephews, I really see that, even nowadays, still, little black girls are very stigmatized at a very young age, like even more so than black boys. And it starts with things that are as simple as, not feeling seen or heard, not feeling pretty.
Yeah.
And all of that to me is a trap, right? It's a trap that you can get into and that actually has you wonder, like, do I matter?
Yeah, but it's the beauty standards of it all, right?
Yeah.
The beauty standards for men aren't as fierce as they are for women.
Yeah.
And
So it starts.
and yeah.
It starts there. It starts there. Definitely. Definitely. And it's a trap that, if you get into it, it can have an impact on, how you go on with your life as an adult. Definitely. So I think that that's one reason why we definitely have to make sure that black girls, little black girls especially, have sufficient role models, enough role models, and that we really specifically create opportunities for them to have equal opportunities and to feel like they do matter.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. So, do you ever find yourself conforming to society at all? Did you ever as a child, or were you brought up to be comfortable being different, regardless of what your environment was saying?
Yeah, I would definitely say that I was probably, brought up with being comfortable with being different. And as I mentioned, I think that to me, the concept of being accepted was, well, people will never accept you unless you're twice as good, right? So I guess that because of that, I wasn't necessarily seeking for acceptance. I was just trying to demonstrate my abilities and fighting for that. But I do think that at some point it says that societal norms kind of converge sometime with being yourself. And it can also be because those societal standards are deeply ingrained in who you are, right? So, there could be things that I'm oblivious to that could demonstrate otherwise,
I see what you're saying.
Definitely.
But I like how you put that about how society conforming to who you are. And when we talk about being ourselves in workspaces as Black people, I think a lot about this. I think about being my authentic self, right? Yeah. And a lot of the times, if I say, okay, well, I don't want to show up looking this way because my dad was adamant. When I grew up, it was like, you can't, wear baggy jeans. You can't have, stuff in your hair. You can't have earrings. You can't have tattoos. I have all those things now. And yet I'm a professional, right? Yeah. And so I'm very conscious of what it means to show up in an authentic way. Yeah. Do you have that same conscience? And do you feel like you're limited in your ability at all to show up as your true authentic self?
For me, I think that authenticity is key as well. And, being true to myself has always served me well in a professional environment. But I think that what you bring up is very interesting. I think that what I do go through, though, is the fact that, when you get in a room full of people that do not look like you, that can't necessarily relate to you, you start, in my opinion, with a deficit in terms of credibility. Mm-hmm. So it's not that you have zero credibility, it's that you probably have minus 20. Mm-hmm. So I think that in a context like that, it can be hard to, have the courage to stand up for yourself and stand up for your beliefs. Mm-hmm. And, all of that, it comes down to unconscious biases, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
But the way that you said it earlier was about society conforming to who you choose to be. And do you truly believe that if you choose to be one way, that over time society will conform? And how much emphasis or how much weight do you put on that versus adapting in order to see success or validation of your success, whether it's a job or a promotion in the short term?
Yeah. I don't necessarily think that it's society will confirm. As I was mentioning, it's more that I'm not necessarily seeking for acceptance, right? I'm more into demonstrating that my presence is key. So that's actually why why I have to matter, why I have to listen to me, for example.
Amazing. So we spoke about a mentor of yours who often empowered you in powerful but subtle ways. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So, back when I was at EY, I had a partner that I worked with that I would say unknowingly maybe would sponsor me. So, in the example that I gave earlier about getting into a room where your credibility starts at below zero, right? He would always start the meeting, for example, by giving me back credit and really explaining to everybody at the table that I was in charge of the file, that I was competent. And, he didn't necessarily do it for that purpose, but, having a credible white man vouch for you is game changer, right?
And how important do you think that is for women in general and specifically for Black women in the workplace?
That's key. That's key. Having someone sponsor you, so having someone that kind of passes on that credibility to you, that's key. It allowed me to have, the confidence to lead the rest of a meeting, for example, knowing that I had attentive ears around the table. And yeah, that's definitely a game changer.
So the impact isn't just on the other people in the room, but it's also on you in terms of the confidence
exactly.
that you were then able to bring to the meeting.
Exactly. Yeah, because with experience, when I say that your confidence starts at -20, that really comes with experience, right? So I didn't necessarily know at first, but afterwards I would get comments sometimes where people would say like, oh, you're really good. After I had demonstrated, they had worked with me. So I kind of, thought, okay, going back, it means that the first time that you met with me, maybe you didn't think for some reason. It's as if you're surprised that I'm competent and that I'm good, right? So that's kind of how I put it into perspective, and I kind of understood, okay, when I get into a room, I don't necessarily start with the same level of credibility as a peer of mine that's a white male.
Yeah.
Right.
And why do you think that is?
Again, unconscious biases. So being young, being Black, being a woman.
You got the trifecta.
Exactly.
You got the trifecta.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the issue. So people are not necessarily doing it willingly. They're not discriminating willingly, but the outcome and the end result is the same. Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. So, did you ever have a mentor who was in, let's say, that position of power, who looked like you and who also sponsored you? And if not, how do you think that would have impacted you?
No, I didn't, unfortunately. And I think that, while it's really important, I think to have, to be able to share the experiences or benefit from the experience of someone that actually knows what you're going through or that you can relate to, I think that's key. But also I think that, even if the mentor does not necessarily look like you, I think sometimes that can be good. They can bring another perspective, and they can still help you build a clearer vision for yourself in your career. So
I totally agree. So is there a lack of conscious engagement? I mean, you spoke about unconscious bias. Is there a lack of conscious engagement in VC and in tech in terms of anti-Black racism? And if there is, why do you think that is?
I wouldn't say that there's no engagement at all, but for sure I would say that there's a lack of, how you put it, conscious engagement. And I think that perhaps one of the reasons is that in Canada, and especially in Quebec, our VC tech ecosystem is not as mature as maybe some other ecosystem around the world. So I feel like, imbalance and inequities are even more palpable. And, the ecosystem here in Quebec has evolved tremendously in the past decade, but perhaps we're not, we're still at an early stage of its life cycle, and we're not ready yet for diversity and inclusiveness to be key priorities.
We could mature without the Black community, right? The US did. So is it about maturity, or is it just about more of the willingness to do it?
Well, I think it's there are various factors. To me, maturity is one of them, definitely, because I understand that, when you take the US, you can have statistics that are not necessarily impressive, but they'll still be better than the ecosystems that we see here, right? So that's where the level of maturity comes into play for me, and I think that it won't become a key priority unless and until it's not only the underrepresented, the underfunded, the oppressed minority that's strongly advocating for it, right?
Basically, you're saying we need allies.
We definitely need allies. The major and the key decision makers in the ecosystem really need to show support. And one thing that's interesting is that the CDPQ recently announced a $250 million equity fund for diversity and inclusion. And definitely, I think that that's a great initiative, an initiative that I salute. And that's a key step and a great step in the right direction.
Do you feel a responsibility to represent the Black community? And if so, what does that pressure feel like, and how do you deal with it?
I don't think that I feel a pressure to represent, but as I was evolving in my career, I realized the fact that it was important for me to be more visible and speak more about my background, my experience, for representation purposes, right?
Because rep matters, and that's why
Yes,
we're here, and that's why you're
exactly,
talking with us today.
exactly. So I think that to me it all comes down to that, to be able to even mentor young Black individuals or young Black women. I think that's key, and that's important. But other than that, I don't necessarily feel like I'm representing any little thing that I do. I'm representing the entire community. I never really had that that pressure.
So where do you see the main pain points being for Black entrepreneurs specifically?
I would say that the main concern as for a Black entrepreneur is that I think it's often what I witness is that it's often maybe harder to go beyond a certain stage, and that's I think that's probably related to the fact that when you're at an early stage, at the pre-seed or seed, your network is really key. And when you're not privileged enough to have access to a network that will sponsor you and help you get further, make introductions, for example, to reputable VC firms, it can be harder, to pass that. In VC, we call it the value of debt. It can be much harder. Yeah.
So, and that's a representation of the network and access to mentors and sponsors?
Yeah, mostly sponsors, because as a VC, often you'll relate to a certain entrepreneur because they are part of such and such reputable person's network.
Yeah.
And when you dig, you notice that the reason why they are is that there's another credible person that made that introduction without necessarily witnessing tangible results.
Yeah.
It's more about, I had a feeling, there was a vibe. So, let me introduce you to this person. So is that luck? I would say that no, that's the definition of privilege. It's the definition of privilege. Yeah. And I think that's something we all often talk about, white privilege. I definitely think that in the tech ecosystem, there's something such as white male privilege.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you talk about sponsorship and mentorship as being two different things. Can you explain what the two are and what the differences are between the two?
To me, when I refer to mentorship, it's really, advising, providing advice and helping you build a vision or a clearer vision of your project, where you really want to go. Whereas a sponsor, as I mentioned, is not necessarily concerned with your performance, how you're doing. They're more there to really act as a catalyst for you to, to elevate you. So, okay, let me open doors for you. And usually that sponsor will have that credibility, enough credibility that, if they go to this person and they say, here's Phil, meet Phil, then, the meeting will happen and be,
That's
and
how
be
I got here.
scheduled,
Yeah, that's exactly how we got here.
scheduled in a matter of minutes. Whereas if it comes from someone else, well, then, it might be harder to get a meeting with certain people.
Definitely.
Right? So those are little acts of sponsorship.
Yeah.
So for sure, a startup needs money. You need capital, but I think sponsorship is key as well.
So, in what ways has your lived experience as a Black woman benefited you along your career?
To me, it's not necessarily only my experience as a Black professional, but also as an immigrant. So I would say that adaptability is probably my strongest asset. So I can usually communicate and relate to people from very different backgrounds, and perform really well in uncharted territory.
Yeah.
So that has definitely been valuable to me in my career.
So, how do you think that the tech and VC ecosystems are positioned in terms of their ability to create social change in regards to anti-Black racism in society, or in, I guess, corporate, or not? Yeah, I guess in corporate environments.
As VC investors, we invest in the most innovative projects, transformative projects, in business models that disrupt entire industries. Yet I find that we often still take very conservative turns to our investment approach. And one thing is that I think sometimes we are oblivious to the fact that, or we become oblivious to the fact that the VC and the tech ecosystem, especially here in Quebec, still leaves very little space for outsiders, to join without this VIP invitation. So I think that's one thing that has to be kept in mind when we think about, how we can contribute to the change in mindset. But definitely we have the ability to. I mean, innovation is key to VCs, right, and to technology. So there are various players that also fuel that innovation. But as you mentioned, I think VCs have a very large role to play, and like you mentioned, we disrupt various industries, but not the diversity and
Yeah, exactly.
inclusion
Not
industry.
I guess the
Not
HR.
yet. We're not there yet.
We're not disrupting that yet.
That specific problem. So I think we need to walk the talk, right? You want to invest in innovative projects and entrepreneurs. Well, we should also take innovative approach to our investment thesis.
That's amazing. I totally believe that. That's a really good point. So, what would you like to see in the tech and VC ecosystems, specifically in regards to the Black community?
One aspect would be, we could ask LPs to advocate more for diversity and embed in their thesis and in their investment approach, require for the funds and the capital that they deploy, so the VCs that they entrust their money with, to deploy it a certain ways, according to certain criteria or certain quotas related to diversity. The main thing that I would like to see is more, VC investors to be hungrier for justice and equality. And as I mentioned earlier, to support the underdogs from time to time, or more often, So I challenge every VC partner that's watching right now to sponsor a Black entrepreneur in the next couple of months, year, because I truly believe that we won't reach fairness and equality, until everybody gets access to the same opportunities, right?
Yeah,
So it's kind of
it's
like
equity.
breaking that cycle of privilege.
Yeah.
So I really challenge every partner in the VC, don't get your associates or your principals to do it. I mean, identify a Black entrepreneur that's working on a solid tech project, and I can make introductions if you don't know any, and really, without getting anything in return in the short term, make an investment in them in the long term and sponsor them. So introduce them to the most reputable people in your network.
So what general advice would you have for a Black entrepreneur who's trying to raise funds in Canada?
We've talked about various barriers, various concerns and issues in the tech ecosystem when it comes to diversity. But I would say, power through, don't be conscious. You need to be conscious of barriers in order to break through them, right? But, don't let that stop you. Keep on doing what you do best and power through. I was mentioning that I like to see VCs root a little more for underdogs and sponsor Black entrepreneurs, but I think that Black entrepreneurs also have their part to play. So don't just wait there for privilege to fall into your lap. Create that privilege for yourself. So don't hesitate to reach out to people, even if they're outside of your network. Reach out to them and ask for help. Ask them to sponsor you. You may get a no, but I think that trying is important. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. So I want to move on to the devil's advocate round. Basically, I make a statement or ask a question, and you respond in 30 to 60 seconds. Why does representation matter?
Because I believe that Black individuals, and even more so young Black girls, need to have access to equal opportunities. And one way to achieve that is for them to have great role models, inspiring role models that they can relate to and that are in power position. In this case, for example, in the professional world. Yeah.
Awesome. There is no racism in Canada.
So that's a very easy statement to make. And I think that it's unfortunate because I think a lot of people actually think that just because when you can't witness it, then it's easy to detach yourself from the problem. But we as minorities, as Black people, know that the reason why you think that there's no racism and that you can't observe it is because it's so deeply ingrained into the system.
Yeah.
So,
into the fabric of society.
Yeah, exactly. It highlights the problem.
Yeah. At my company, we're colorblind. We don't see race. We've never had a racial issue or a racism issue. What do you say to that?
I think it's a shame to be colorblind. I mean, it's so important to see differences, to see diversity. I mean, to me, you have to acknowledge the differences in order to really embrace them.
Why do we have to be talking about race all the time? Can't we all just get along? What do you say to that?
Because there are, deep issues of systemic racism that some of us are facing. And I think we can't remain silent until we reach equality. And that won't be done until Black individuals, minorities have access to equal opportunities and the same level of privilege than the white majority.
And finally, we don't have a racism issue. There's just no Black talent in tech.
I would say, easy, go outside of your network. When you're seeking inside of the same network all the time, it's easy not to necessarily find diversity. We tend to have networks that are really, with people that have similar backgrounds. So you're really looking for Black talent, go outside on purpose. Purposely go outside of your network.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It was great to have you. I hope to talk to you again soon, post-COVID, ideally. But thank you so much for being on Rep Matters today.
Thank you for having me, Phil.
Thanks for watching Rep Matters. Keep the conversation going by liking, commenting, and especially sharing our videos with your community. Stay updated by following us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. See you next time.